whatever. I peaked in high school. I was really good at football in high school. And then now I'm not good at football.
Maybe there is a limit that you can hit creatively. And maybe you've reached it. Why does that matter? Who cares?
Ooh. Welcome, listeners.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Your Next Film podcast. I am your host, Zachary Koch.
And I'm your co-host, Matteo Guthrie.
And on this podcast, we talk about filmmaking, and our mission is to empower young filmmakers and professionals to excel at their craft.
We're here to talk about how to make your best film and make it better.
And I think a lot of the principles that we go over on this podcast can be applicable to, other crafts as well. Share this with a fellow creative, not just a filmmaker, but share it with a filmmaker too.
So jumping into it, in this episode, we will be discussing two topics. The first being avoiding stagnation. You're progressing despite the calm seas of where you are right now. You're not Martin Scorsese, you're not Spielberg. Frankly, you're not even Adam McKay. So how to push yourself. And we all know where we're going. We all know getting an agent. We all know that. But until then, how are you pushing yourself and avoiding stagnating in your style until you can go full-time creative outside of the corporate workplace? And our second topic, no budget locations and how to make those work, which is something both of us have a lot of fun experience in.
Well, just starting out with the avoiding stagnation. Okay. What do you mean by avoiding stagnation? Because when I think of that, I think of becoming complacent. I think of not pushing yourself creatively. But it seemed like maybe you were coming at this from a little bit of a different angle. But maybe I'm wrong.
So to answer your question, yes, there comes a point, and I felt this point very early on, actually, where I had just graduated. I was freshly in the workforce. And at that time, it was pandemic era, so it was just find a job, something that would put money in my account, therefore I wouldn't starve. And within that, I found myself, I'd been primed to be this perfect creative machine. I got my English writing major, I got my media production minor, and I was ready to go out there and change the world through art or whatever. And I found that I was out there and I was working an audiovisual installer job, and I was like, oh, so my degree was for nothing, actually, which is just to say I was having a bad time and panicking. But then, fast forward to, a couple years ago, I'm writing professional writing jobs now, and it's not stuff that necessarily challenges me creatively. There's challenging me in other ways, but not necessarily in the creative ways that really help with making film. And I was like, I'm kind of like, I'll put out a script, but it's kind of no different than my last script. And I find myself stagnating. I'm not progressing. I'm not learning. I'm not evolving my style. I am just here because I never really have a chance to really challenge myself and grow because I'm too busy.
Do you feel like you're stagnating even though you're continuing to create? Like, do you think when comparing your own work against your other work?
Like I'd look at, in this period. Now I've moved past this. I've challenged myself. I've worked on creative projects that have really forced me to challenge the way I write, and therefore I don't feel as stagnant. But there was a time where I was like, I would put out a script being the writer that I am, and I would go like, oh yeah, this is solid, but my other script was also solid, and none of these are as good as I really want to progress. And because, it's not like I had a lot of creative chances working where I was working, doing what I was doing. Just the circumstances were not there for me to creatively grow. And I was feeling like I was hitting the plateau. This is as high a quality as I can get, and I'm never moving past this.
I think it's an optics problem a little bit.
Okay.
Because funny enough, I had a bit of a crisis literally last night where I was complaining to my wife saying, I don't know if I'm on the right track in any aspect of my life. I feel like I'm becoming stagnant.
Existential crisis.
Oh, that's just on the daily for me. But yeah, no, I had a bit of a crisis yesterday along on the same lines of not feeling like I was getting anywhere. And I feel like I haven't had feedback from anything I've done. Like I've been putting things out. I've been making things. I've been making strides in my career. And I don't know if I've had that confirmation of like, oh, that worked necessarily. And she told me basically that it was a problem with setting goals, because if you feel like you're stagnating and you're not improving, well, what metric are you using to evaluate whether that's true or not? And setting goals and then measuring the outcome based off those goals is how you know whether you actually are or are not stagnating.
The way I got out of that was I threw myself into just like the wackiest, hardest thing I could do. And I just went at it, and I was like, if it's bad, it's bad. But like, I'm going to like, I'm like a shark. If I just don't keep moving, I die. And so I was like, I don't want to creatively die. It was less goals for me. And it was more just like you have to mix it up. My execution was stagnant. I was sitting, like there was no creative advancement through this practice. I was doing scales on a piano, but I wasn't playing songs.
So would you agree or disagree that stagnation is the result of not stepping out of your comfort zone?
Not necessarily. I've definitely seen some good directors like Wes Anderson every 10 years. They get stuck on a theme and they just keep doing it. And they're not stepping out of their comfort zone. And I think it's admirable that they are taking this theme that they like and they're going just full steam into it and evolving their style around it and how they approach it. I think that's very good. Simultaneously, like Darjeeling Express or Darjeeling Limited, like people got a little bored. They're like, Wes Anderson, we've seen you do this for quite a while. This doesn't matter anymore. And he took that criticism to heart, made a bunch of films that like Moonrise Kingdom that like we just never really like seen before from him. And then now he's kind of back to a style that everybody's views more or less as a brand now. And like that's definitely like, yeah, he's not stepping out of his comfort zone, but there's plenty of people I know who are really trying with their stuff. And it's just like,
do you think what's happening there is they've just kind of hit the threshold of what they can accomplish creatively?
That's what I'm always worried about, is like, well, have I hit the threshold? You know, is this my Ridley Scott moment where I just make like a bunch of middling but pretty good films?
Let's just say that is the case. Maybe there is a limit that you can hit creatively, and maybe you've reached it, and maybe other people have felt like they've reached it. Why does that matter? Who cares?
Ooh,
as long as your creative impulse is being satisfied and you're putting out new things.
This is maybe an ideological thing, but my creative impulse is, I'm very much almost growth mindset with my creative impulse. I always have to be growing.
Sure.
I always have to, the next one has to be better. I am in probably, I would say, terrified of the sophomore slump. If I'm not as good or better, then I just don't want to do it, because then you're always chasing that high. And it's not that I'll stop making, movies after that, but that, like, my Goodfellas, my Titanic, whatever, like if it's all downhill from there, I'll keep making movies, but I will not be as fulfilled as if I could explore things and do new things.
So you have to feel like you're getting better.
I have to be getting better, because if I'm not getting better, what's the point?
I think there's a point, art for art's sake.
Oh, I 100% believe in art's sake.
Put out what scratches your creative impulse, but for you, it's not just enough to make something.
I just have to make something good. And if I'm not making it better than the last one, then it's just not as good.
You said two things there.
Okay.
You said you have to be making things that are good.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing. And you have to be making things that are better than the last. I think the artist's call, so to speak, is about having the courage to make bad things.
Yeah.
And so that seems to imply that, like, who's to even step out in the first place if they have the same kind of mindset as you.
Yeah, and again, that's where like the stagnation, like fear sets in, because I'm like, do I just stop making? Am I like? It's not that I'm going to stop making, because you can't be afraid of making bad things, but if I'm plateaued, like, making something good is the point, and like, do I stop being good? Really, it comes down to like evolving your style is important, right? Evolving yourself as an artist. Like I was saying, do it weird, do it bad. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, if you are cozy and comfortable in your little hole, are you really like pushing yourself?
It feels like we're conflating different terms here.
Probably.
And I want to get to the bottom of it.
Okay.
Matteo.
To the bottom of the cozy hole?
I understand the fear, and I understand where you're coming from, of that fear of, like, not improving.
Stagnant means you've peaked, basically.
Yeah. But we made a film that we're actually very proud of called Bleeding Heart Routine. And the goal of that film was to, granted, make something that was good.
Yeah.
But it wasn't breaking new ground. And we knew that. But we still thought it was worth making.
I don't think we were stagnating at that point, though. When people talk about, I've peaked, it's usually I've peaked means that, like, I peaked in high school. I was really good at football in high school. And then now I'm not good at football. because I'm not as good as I was, when I was young and had joints. But like now, like when you're stagnating, so you hit that peak and then you're just kind of the same, which is fine if you need, it's like your favorite restaurant. You never want them to be.
Well, you also go back to the restaurant hoping it's going to be the same.
Yeah, you go back to the favorite restaurant is good. But at the same time, if I'm like, you know what, I want some really good food, right? And I don't want my comfort food, I will not go to my favorite restaurant, because I will go to a different restaurant that's serving me new stuff, that maybe better stuff. In this allegory of stagnation, you are competing against yourself because you already made a movie like this. We'd never made Bleeding Heart Routine before. It was kind of an accomplishment for us, considering some of the logistics that were required. It was a challenge.
Yeah, we learned a lot from that project.
But if we make it again, we're not going to learn. I mean, we'll learn different things probably, but if we just make like a clone of that, we won't. Mm-hmm. If we push the same themes as Bleeding Heart Routine into another film about loneliness, perhaps about a robot, which is a microfilm we released recently, we took those same themes, and at least I as a writer realized that, yes, this is very close to a lonely detective, a lonely robot.
Yes, but that's like an artist that works with, the same colors, but makes something new out of it.
Yes.
Does God Love Robots is very different from Bleeding Heart Routine.
And that's we did not stagnate. If I were to instead not try to make something better and different, and if I were just making kind of the same quality stuff.
I think it just is a matter of perspective, though. There's always an opportunity to learn.
Yes.
I can't imagine making something that I didn't learn something new from. I can't imagine a whole lifetime of making films where I didn't learn at least one new thing.
But what if you were trying and you still didn't make anything better? That's terrifying.
For sure. Buying a house that you'll eventually die in, also terrifying.
So you're saying that at some point you will stagnate and it will be good?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I don't think you'll realize that you stagnated, though. As an artist, you have faith that the art you create is going to transcend you. I think the reason why we create is because we want to be wowed by the things that we create. We're putting something out there that starts to speak for itself, and sometimes it says things that we didn't expect. Mm-hmm. And so this fear of stagnation seems to be related to that, where you get to a point where you lose your faith and can't imagine your art saying anything outside of what you intended for it to say. You've seen behind the curtain enough times at this point. You've seen how your projects typically go.
I mean, I get your point, and I've just, at the same time, I can't deny that, just like in the last episode, we were like, make good films. Why make a film? Why do a push-up if you've already done a push-up and it doesn't make stronger? But if it doesn't make you stronger.
But that would never happen. Doing push-ups will always make you stronger. And that's my opinion here, is that I can't imagine you not making something and not.
You've defeated me with my own metaphor.
Look, I don't think that every project gets better than the last one in a linear way.
No, it's not.
Sometimes you make lateral moves.
Some of them will be lateral, but they'll be different. Tom Clancy wrote all these military thrillers, spy thrillers, and they were great. Mm-hmm. But at some point, all the Tom Clancy pretenders who write military thrillers just like he did are not. They are clocking into work. They aren't working on a masterpiece. They aren't working to push themselves.
But I don't see that happening with a creative that's maybe they're getting paid for some of their art, but I just don't see this happening for people like you and I. We have no incentive to make the same thing over and over again, and there's no reason to.
I mean, that's why it's but I'm not going to stop creating art, but I will end up becoming somebody's favorite restaurant rather than something that Jordan Peele will put something out and you're like, oh, I can't wait to see it, because I know Jordan Peele has a level of quality, but I also know that he keeps trying to make his movies better. I would take a concept, a very different concept, a quirky concept, like My Father-in-Law's a Werewolf, something fun like that. One of my scripts was processing generational trauma through basically werewolf father, werewolf daughter, because they're both alike, and then kind of the husband's navigating that while his brother's turning into a vampire as well. It was very, a quirky college level script. And I really liked that concept. It was one of the wilder things I had done, because I was trying surrealism, right? And I put that out, and the script was just as good as the web series scripts that we'd never produced. And I was like, well, the thing is that I've done 4 years of college in between What I did was I hit a level, I put out some solid scripts, and then I made one that was on the same line, one that was on the same line, one that was on the same line, and the quality just went straight, which is fine until you hit like your fifth script. And then you're like, oh, this is just like script from 2 years ago. Basically what happened was I needed to shake up I just needed to shake up the way I wrote. And I did that. I shook up my workflow. I went really in depth.
What did you do with your workflow that made you approach it differently?
Specifically, I'd always been writing characters a very specific way. And I basically said, I'm actually going to change the way I focus on characters. And I went really in depth, and I put out Tapirs Hate Him after this. And this, I had just quit my AV job, and I was working a job that I liked much more and utilized my skills much more. And so it was kind of like the big break was in between. Like I was on a break, and I was like, okay, I'm going to write this script, and I have to do this because otherwise, I've plateaued. And I just changed things up. I did it a little weirder. I did like the way that characters interacted weirder. And I really focused on how I developed characters, and I changed it from anything I'd ever done before.
Right. If you feel like things are too samey, then you need to change it up or step out of your comfort zone or fundamentally change the way that you approach things.
Because I know plenty of other young creatives who are like, I'm doing my thing, I'm doing things differently, but it's just not different enough. And like what I did differently was basically turn my entire workflow on its head. Drive on the other side of the road for a second just to like get you out of there. Because then when I return back to like the kind of same workflows, you see it
with new eyes. Yeah.
Like I'm using what I've learned from those other ones. And it then like lets me go, oh, this is where I'm samey again. And I can just turn the switch.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Do it weird, do it bad, etc. And then you can always come back.
Sure.
Which is what I say, do it different, etc., etc.
Just by virtue of doing that doesn't mean that you're going to solve it.
No.
Like, if you want to slay the dragon, you have to pick up the sword and start swinging at it. But that doesn't mean that you're going to kill it.
No.
You have to keep swinging at it, and probably swinging at it in different ways, in different areas before you finally defeat it. That's the path out, but it's not a straight path.
No, it's not a straight path. And like, again, I did a lot of bad stuff to get to...
And you had to.
Tapirs Hate Him. And I had to.
And so just be encouraged that if you've tried that, you feel like you're stagnating, so you changed things up, you did something in a different way, and then still felt like it wasn't as good. You got to do it again. Like, you got to keep innovating, and not everything's going to hit.
What got me was that, for example, with Whiskey Futures...
I don't consider that film a part of our filmography.
Really? Interesting.
I don't think of it.
Because it's on my channel.
Maybe out of sight, out of mind kind of thing, but also, I don't know.
It was like, I would say compared to the stuff that I was putting out before Whiskey Futures, I was like, I'm stagnating.
Frankly, the films that we were putting out before Whiskey Futures were better.
Yeah, they were. I mean, I was worried that Choose a Wagon was going to be the best film we'd ever done, and it was a micro short that we put very little thought in. I mean, we put thought into it, but comparatively to some of the other projects that I'd cooked up, not much was going into Choose a Wagon, and I was really worried that was going to be the end of it. I could never beat Choose a Wagon, and that would always be my favorite film, and it'd be something that I made in college before I got like trained or whatever.
Sure.
And that I would be stagnant, and that would, I would have peaked in college, and that would have been really funny, and all my friends we would watch it, like major holidays or whatever, to like, get all together and be like, remember this one? And be like, yeah, I love that one. And like, that would be my filmmaking, like what I'd be remembered for. And like, they wouldn't even be like, oh yeah, he put out other stuff. Like, this is my favorite because I really like this, but he put out other stuff that like is also pretty good. It would be like, no, this is the best thing he's ever done.
No, I see your fear there. A couple of things that come to mind, and I think this will hopefully help
wrap
us wrap up and move on to topic two of this same podcast episode. There's the concept of a PR, and you don't break your last PR every time you go out and run. Yeah. It's impossible, but you have to keep going out and run if you have any chance of breaking it again. So that very much maps on well to our whole mentality of keep experimenting, keep creating. You're not guaranteed to do better than last time just by virtue of doing that. Yeah. But you have to do that in order to get better at all. That's the path out.
You're not a bad artist if you do, hit the wall and like Wes Anderson is not a bad artist if he hits the wall and stagnates.
No. And I'm not a bad runner
But
just because I stagnated.
You are a bad artist if you kind of stop trying. If you're like, oh, I'm just happy here. I'm happy making just mob movies.
I agree.
And again, like this isn't like some huge judgment, but it's like if you're just like, yeah, you're not. I wouldn't go so far as to call you a bad artist, but I would definitely say
you're definitely not better.
Yeah, you're not a better artist for that.
Than you were.
You might be learning some things, but you're not pushing the art form.
Sure.
And like the goal is to push the art form. Even through imitation, you're doing something slightly different. Because if you're not pushing the art form, you might as well be an AI.
Yeah. No, that's a great place to end it right there.
Yeah, there we go. I've said it. I've ranted. Cut the middle 20 out and we'll be good. We said nothing of words.
It's like the spirals example. Yeah. It's like, we're going in a circle, but it's getting a little off from the other circle. We're getting somewhere.
And now for something completely different. No budget locations.
Oh, yeah.
So
all of our locations?
Yeah, all of our locations.
No, not true.
Not true.
Actually.
We spent like $400 on that one location. No, it was like
the theater?
200. It
was, I thought it was like something like that. Totally worth it, by the way.
Yeah, but just as we were talking, we haven't made it yet, so therefore we don't have a studio that'll just say, here's way too much money, go get locations, and then you can go over budget and have to like get more. And so therefore we have to kind of get what we can where we do. Mm-hmm. And as part of that is kind of like locations are expensive because you're renting a space and then you have to sometimes get insurance for that and
clean up.
Yeah. And, when you're making an independent film on already no budget.
And you're probably not going to make money off it.
Yeah. There's very little like actual profit from. It starts to get a little dicey on like affording things like that, especially if you want to afford, crafty for your actors.
You want to afford that.
You want to afford that, right?
It's just like a non-starter if you don't have
it's like, hey, like
food and water.
Come out at like 3 a.m. for the shoot because it's dark outside. Also, like we had to pay lots of money, so you get like a thing of fruit snacks.
Oh gosh. Don't do that.
Don't be that person. And to not be that person, maybe get cheap locations.
Locations?
And free is always cheapest. So, Zach, I recall one time shooting in the parking lot of this pretty like neat looking industrial building. Mm-hmm. And the owner heard from somebody, it was a small town. So of course somebody's like, hey, I just saw a bunch of people in your parking lot with film equipment. What's that about? Pulls up on a motorcycle with a sidecar.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. And unceremoniously kicks us out because if I recall, you had called the number of the business to ask for permission to film in their parking lot and gotten no answer. So it was like, well, I guess they don't work there.
Oh, I don't even remember calling.
Yeah. Oh, did you not call?
I don't think I called, dude. We film without permits, allegedly.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
We have in the past. Years ago, statute of limitations has passed.
Yeah.
You're a young filmmaker. Can't afford it. Public parks exist, for example. And
for sure.
Public parks are fantastic places to film. They also can kind of be the worst because everybody gets to go to a public park. You don't get to block off streets. That's just where you are. So choose a good time and hope that people have like the politeness to not walk through your shot.
Mm-hmm. Which in Oklahoma, people tend to be fairly polite.
Yeah, they're like, oh yeah, I don't want. Some of them just don't really want to be in the background on camera. So
which is fair.
Like, it's good all around there, but it's definitely there are pros and cons of public parks, and one of those pros is that basically any time of day or night you can just kind of go into a public park and nobody's going to bother you. Sometimes they're like they close or whatever, but it's like
the only thing you have to be worried about when it comes to just finding locations broadly is private property.
Yeah.
And most property in the United States is private property. Even if it doesn't seem like it.
A guy with a motorcycle with a sidecar will pull up, kick you out. But from that, abandoned buildings, hit or miss, frankly. Sometimes they can be really nice. You're in like some pretty city-owned property that's nobody's on and you just need kind of a rundown house and you can shoot a location that quite literally will never look like that again because somebody's going to come in with spray paint, the weather's going to hit it. A random fire could break out just from local kids and you will have both preserved like kind of a piece of history and also you have a free location that looks pretty neat.
You're doing the right thing.
Yeah. By trespassing. But usually, unless you've like caused property damage, it's going to be like move along, and then you can be like, hey, sorry, whatever.
Which hopefully you're not causing property damage.
Yeah.
What the hell are you doing out there?
Yeah, right.
Put the chainsaws down. This isn't Mandy.
This isn't Mandy. But like there have been films like, I don't know if you remember Hardcore Henry, the first person film. Yeah. They just decided, they saw a bridge, and they were like, oh, it would be really cool if they're like parkour stuntman guys. It'd be really cool if you could just run up that bridge for like this shot. And so the guy just runs up the side of the bridge, like very dangerous. It was definitely kind of an off the cuff production. Mm-hmm. And he like runs up the bridge, does the whole thing, gets down. And I recall he did it without getting caught.
Oh, wow. Good for him.
Which is pretty good, because they were like in the middle of Glasgow when they did it. So it was like a thing. So like big productions also do this sort of thing. Dev Patel shot part of Monkey Man. Like any underwater scenes you see in Monkey Man, he shot that in his hotel bathtub, because the project was so strapped for cash that it was like, hotel bathtub, that's where we're going to shoot.
That sounds like a blast.
Yeah, like it was a blast. He's he got an eye infection just like crawling around to the floor of the bathroom in one of the scenes. Go see Monkey Man if you haven't. It's really good.
Yeah, this is like the third time you've mentioned it, so that's one way to get me to watch it.
It caused quite an impression. But there are ways to do no budget locations that sometimes it's filming in your own house, sometimes it's filming street scenes like they did in Pi, by Darren Aronofsky's first film. He just there's a lot of street scenes because that's really cheap, shooting on the subway, right? Public place, just go do it. Shoot where you can, when you can. Obviously, like, road noise is going to be a big thing. If you're shooting next to an airport, try not to have dialogue because it's going to suck otherwise.
Or in a nightclub.
Yeah. Nightclubs, copyrighted music, that's the worst.
Yeah, you're not going to get anywhere with that.
Either that or you're going to have a lot of unfun ADR to do.
So the thing with locations for low budget filmmaking, that it's been one of the hardest things for me to figure out alongside finding good talent. But I think kind of the go-to advice for this sort of thing is to write stories around locations you have access to. And that's something you can do very easily, whether it's...
Or shoot really up close and just have ambient sound.
Very likely, if you just need a location because, like, for example, you wrote a theater scene for Bleeding Heart Routine.
Yeah, and it had to be a theater
There
scene.
was no way that we were going to film anywhere that wasn't in a theater.
Unless we, did some unfun compositing.
Yeah.
And that would look fake.
It would have looked fake. We had to film it in an actual theater. And so we had to spend money for that.
I did get a bargain.
Yeah, we didn't spend much.
Yeah, I spent like $200.
Yeah, which isn't bad. We were there. We had 2 hours there.
Yeah.
So, about standard rate for locations, like $100 an hour. But that's what you get. Now, I don't think you did anything wrong.
Yeah.
I think the film was great, and I think it was worth buying that location temporarily or renting it. But if we were trying to do it for no money at all, and that was a non-negotiable, you would have had to write a script from the start around locations that you knew would free.
Like her couch.
Yeah.
And it would be in a living room that would probably be one of my friend's living rooms.
That would have been cool too, actually.
And it would have been cool too, but it didn't have the noir.
They needed to be out somewhere.
Yeah, totally they needed to be out somewhere.
But if you're concerned about this sort of thing and you're in the ideation phase and you have the luxury of writing around locations you have access to specifically for free, then that's a great place to start. Additionally, legally, basically anywhere, you have to have a filming permit from the
city that you are
the city in order to film in public spaces. You just have to have it. In parks, you need a permit. On the street, you need a permit. In Scissortail Park, where we shot, we needed a permit for that. Didn't have a permit for that. So what do you do? Because permits aren't particularly expensive, but a couple of things about it. One, it's not free, usually. For two, you might get told no. Not ideal if you're really set on filming somewhere in particular. Also, it's another thing you have to add to your pre-production.
When you get to a certain budget, a $60,000 indie film is it's going to be much better to have a permit than not.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's ideal.
But not for whenever it's like, oh yeah, the budget is the shoestrings on my shoe.
Private property is a no-go. Very risky, very illegal. Don't do that. Filming without a permit, especially in our media age, people are pulling out their phones, filming all the time.
You can shoot a film on iPhone and show it in a festival, and it'll look at least halfway passable.
For sure.
Depending what you do to your iPhone, it can look actually like pretty good.
Think about the time period where filmmaking was, kind of newer. It was a lot more expensive, a lot more involved. Productions were huge. Think about the time period where they created legislation that required filming permits for locations. The reason for that is because it was very disruptive to be at those locations filming. So what it comes down to, and the reason why you need permits, is because filming is usually very disruptive. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to do it without a permit, you need to not make it disruptive.
For example, like if you're filming a robbery scene, maybe don't just wave realistic looking guns in the air in the street.
That's a no-go. Use common sense. So don't be disruptive. Maybe don't use giant camera setups. Maybe don't have someone with a boom pole, because somehow boom poles are like a dead giveaway that it's a film project.
I mean, it's pretty that makes sense.
It's like the silhouette of that. Yeah. The camera is kind of like, camera can be small, tucked away, whatever. Up to a certain age, you can use the excuse of, we're just like students working on a school project, and no one's going to have a problem with that.
Per private property, this is one to really lean on friends and family. If you have a network of people kind of around, they'll I'd love for you to, I'd love to help you out with your art. People love to be involved with your projects unless you're like some sort of weird tyrant on set. So normally it's like, hey, like if you ask, hey, can we film here? Sometimes just random store owners will be like, sure. Mm-hmm. I did that with a gas station one time.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. It's like, hey, can we film up front? And he's like, yeah, sure. I was like, okay, cool. That was my senior project film, was the gas station, and that was just some gas station that we're like, hey, and we were students, and my events, my location manager bought beer from them all the time, so it didn't matter. He was like, yeah, of course I'll help a customer out. But if you have people with relationships that would be willing to help you, don't feel that you have to only shoot in public places. Use somebody's couch, use your own couch, you know. You can set dress places to look really cool. Mm-hmm. But, for example, if one of your crew has an uncle that has some property and you need to shoot in the woods, do that. Because sometimes a public park doesn't look the greatest for shooting in the woods.
Yeah, definitely not as spooky.
Yeah. It really comes down to utilizing what you have, which is what we talked about when we talked about using crew. Use what you have, write around it, maybe write a script that doesn't require 1,800 people for crew. Mm-hmm. Maybe write
1,800 different locations.
Yeah, or 1,800 different locations, which I'm very guilty of. And I would say definitely for directors who kind of get a script, maybe kind of fudge the locations a little bit. Does this need to be here? Because if it doesn't need to be here, we can put it somewhere else that might not be as visually interesting, but we can dress up and shoot to be still visually pleasing.
That's why I'm a little bit excited about some of these AI tools and the abilities to kind of change the environments that you're filming in a little bit.
Matte paintings.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, we've just come full circle to matte paintings.
One thing about shooting in people's houses, turning off the AC in summer, brutal but necessary, so make sure they're cool with that.
Which is not something we did for this podcast.
No.
The AC came on multiple times.
We hope that you've gathered something pretty valuable from this, from our discussion, from our advice.
Even if it was small.
We
still hope you got something out of it.
In the meantime, I'm Matteo Guthrie.
And I'm Zachary Koch.
And this has been
Your Next Film. Saying it at the same time was...
Yeah, right.
That was a very kind of yes and thing to do.